I kind of feel as if I've done as much as I can with American superheroes right now, especially after Multiversity, which was all about the relationship of the creator to the audience, which has changed so much in the last few years. It kind of, I felt I'd said enough, and I've also got this feeling that American culture's still going through this aftershock of 9/11, where it's dealing with very dark and themes of viral invasion and zombie invasion and infection, and I'm a bit tired of it. So I kind of, when I'm doing superheroes now, I've been going to India and China, which have a much more positive, forward-looking cultures, even though they're dragging themselves out of a lot of problems, but they do have a sense of the future. And what worries me is that America's kind of lost its sense of the future right now. The idea is the future is going to be the collapse of empire, or the rise of the zombies, or something that wipes us all out. So I kind of feel I want to oppose that feeling, because I'm not that depressive, unfortunately. So I kind of laid down the American superheroes for a while, apart from the Wonder Woman stuff that I'm doing, which I'm very excited about because it's changed my head about how to tell comics. I kind of feel as if I reached a dead end with all that stuff, and not necessarily a dead end, just a cul-de-sac, let's call it, for now.
So Multiversity was so much about like the packaging of the comics, and the comic as physical objects, and like the actual holding the comic was part of the act of interacting with it. Heavy Metal is obviously this thing that is like, the whole magazine is like, it's very unique, distinct package. Are you going to be able to play around with like the kind of format of Heavy Metal and talk kind of in an interesting way and make people think about what they're holding and what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I want to do, with Heavy Metal, I'm kind of trying to get this aesthetic, I feel that Heavy Metal has a certain approach which is slightly mired in the 80s, and it's worked for a long time, but from my point of view, I haven't really read it for a long time, since Richard Corbin was doing those Den and Neverwhere stories, which I really loved. So for me, it's like coming back, trying to immerse myself in something and think, how do I move this forward? How do I deal with the sexuality that is now seems slightly dated? How do I move forward? How do I bring in more foreign creators, more women, more perspectives? So that's really, at the start of the job, that's what I'm trying to do, just broader sexual perspectives here and more types of stories. So it's kind of, I want it more psychedelic, I want more science fiction, I want more kind of 70s influences of paths that we never really followed, that comics could have gone down in the 70s. And right now it's all this slightly incoherent. As they just begin the job, I kind of know what I'm looking for, but I haven't seen the work yet. I haven't been able to select and guide it yet.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Heavy Metal, I think of this.
Exactly,
I
yeah.
think of softcore porn.
Yeah, and it's kind of Los Angeles Sunset Strip, kind of heavy metal video.
For like, teenage boys.
And I think, unfortunately, we're in a world now where teenage boys have grown up. They've seen everything from the age of 12 or 8. Right. So that stuff is not. It doesn't titillate, I don't think, anymore. It doesn't arouse anymore in the same way that it might have when I was a 16-year-old boy in 1976. Yeah, that was the only place I could see sci-fi tits. But now I think we live in a much more sophisticated world, a world with it's a greater spectrum of possibilities that I think we should be exploring. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so are you going to dial back the sexuality, or just find different ways of talking about sexuality in the magazine?
We're actually going to dial it up, but I want to find different ways of projecting it that are more sophisticated and more contemporary, basically. But I think sexuality is a big part of the Heavy Metal DNA. It's just I don't want it to be a 1980s Motley Crue sexuality.
Are you going to be doing a lot of writing yourself for the comics in Heavy Metal?
Yeah, I want to do some strips in there and also editorial content, because I think one of the best eras of the magazine was when they had people like William Burroughs writing stuff, and they would interview Douglas Adams or speak to scientists, and they had these amazing reviews of underground comics and records. So I want to bring that back, that editorial content, and make it almost, the Clubhouse feeling, where the readers again and the creator and the audience have more of a dialogue, and everyone's involved in this place. This is a place we can all come to.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Heavy Metal, I think of, like you said, Corbin. I think of Moebius. I think of these like really insane bande dessinée style artists who are doing these like bizarre futuristic cities. Like, how do we imagine the future city now that we're living in the 21st century, like the futuristic cyberpunk world?
Well, I think the sad thing is that people certainly in the West, people have tended to imagine the future city as a ruin. If you look at the Batman games, Gotham City's like a hell. No one would actually want to live in that place. And the same in the movies. And you look at something like Mad Max, where there are no cities. It's been destroyed. A city is now a convoy of vehicles. So I kind of feel our view of the future has become, as I said, diminished. So I kind of want this to be the source of, let's imagine again, let's see what would the city of the future, but honestly, let's start thinking about this. It wouldn't necessarily be soaring phallic towers anymore, it might be something new that we need to think about. So all of that, I want to bring basically science fiction again, like possible forward-looking progressive science fiction that kind of imagine we did have a future, imagine we don't blow ourselves up, what are we going to do?
But part of it is that the real life city is so gentrified. I mean, unless it's like Detroit, it's so gentrified, it's like a theme park now. And it's, how do you make a theme park cool and edgy and interesting, right?
Well, that's the thing, it's just to do with the people who live in it, you know, and I think a theme park could be cool. If we let the homeless take over Disneyland, it might be interesting. So, I think it's letting everyone speak, it's giving everyone a voice. And again, that's what's been happening the last few years. Thanks to the internet, everyone's getting to speak and everyone's getting to talk. So I think if we listen to all the voices and stop listening to just architects who want to build soaring monoliths, there will be other ways of looking at it.
Like you mentioned, heavy metal is so much an artifact of like 80s comics. It's such a part of like the kind of a different world in comics publishing. How do you get people back into the idea of like a magazine that's just a comics anthology? It's sort of like the American Shonen Jump or something.
Well, there's that. I want to get them back into it by making sure the content is right and making sure the covers are attractive and suggest a new way forward. So I think it's just, that's my job now. I'm just at the start of the job. What do I select in order to get that feeling across, you know, and to get some absurdity back into it as well, which is, you know, why I want to talk to some people who do, like Steve Ayler and like Michael Cooperman, you know, people whose work I think are on that much more esoteric absurdity, which I love. Right. So I want that, and I just kind of multiple voices. I mean, if we do this talk again in February, I will actually be able to show you what I mean. But right now, it's kind of, these are inchoate thoughts. Right.
And there's actually a heavy metal movie that's supposedly happening that might kind of, you know.
I mean, I don't have much to do with that, and I didn't even see the original heavy metal movie, but they seem to be talking about new stuff. And again, if we can influence how that appears, that'd be interesting.
And so, like, you know, I mean, also, besides the cyberpunk stuff, I think of heavy metal, I think of, like, crazy epic fantasy, like the chick they're writing on, whatever the hell that is, like, just crazy, like, Frazetta style, like, is there going to be, like, larger-than-life, like, sword and sorcery shit?
Well, it depends what people start sending me, you know, I mean, I love that sword and sorcery stuff, but if we're going to do it, and I guess none of this has been announced yet, but one of the stories I'm thinking about doing for it is a kind of sword and sorcery thing. Excuse me. But again, not everything I want updated, everything I want contemporised, everything that was never questioned in the past, I want to question. So if we're doing sword and sorcery, it's going to be something that kind of questions some of those basic assumptions of how that stuff works.
So you were doing Multiversity at the exact same time that DC was doing Convergence and Marvel was doing their Secret Wars thing. Have we gone as far as we can with like multiverses and metafictional crossovers between different continuities and that kind of thing? Is that done now?
God, I hope so. But, I mean, I started Multiversity in 2006. Honestly, I mean, most of the issues were written then, and all I've done is refined it. And we waited 3 years for Frank Quitely to do his beautiful work, so that kind of caused the delay. But for me, it was all done years ago. It was a follow-up to 52 and then Final Crisis originally. So it was kind of amusing for me to see that everyone started doing this kind of multiple stuff. But I honestly think that's just capitalism at work. It's not necessarily creativity. It's the same ideas if you look at Kit Kats. You now get orange Kit Kats and toffee Kit Kats. All it is now you've got an orange Wolverine and a toffee Batman. And so I kind of felt all they were doing was fractioning the characters to appeal to ever more distinct consumer groups.
What kind of car would Tofu Batman drive?
Tofu Batman, I don't know if he'd need a car at all, he'd just bounce down the street, wouldn't he?
You'd have tofu batarangs, or maybe, you know, Satan batarang.
Flings it into your mouth and that's enough to stop you. He was too busy enjoying that lovely tofu to commit crimes.
Right. So do you think that, you know, we've gone, in terms of just deconstructing comics in general, do you think that that's kind of reached its furthest point now, or do you...
Well, honestly, it feels like that, you know, and I've always had this idea that comics, mainstream comics move through 4 ages, and everyone agrees on the golden age and the silver age, and then there was the kind of dark age of the 80s and 90s, and halfway through the 90s we had this kind of retro nostalgic thing that appeared, and it yielded a lot of interesting stuff. You know, that's when I was doing my Justice League, and suddenly we were allowed to do big sci-fi absurdist adventures again. We didn't have to do stories about Batman weeping over his torn tights or whatever. And But that era is now over. It's 20 years since I did my Justice League, so it's almost as if whatever that age was and whatever history we'll call it, it's over now. So we really need to start thinking, what are they now? What is it? What is it moving forward? And no one's yet defined that, and so it'll be interesting to see. And we just need, again, new young people, different voices who will define that. It's, we had a chance to do that 20 years. It's time for everyone else now to do the next 20 years.
So the only thing you're doing for DC now is Wonder Woman, because I know you're doing that breakfast and things tomorrow morning.
I'm doing Wonder Woman. There's a couple of announcements for projects that I'm doing. I mean, I haven't left DC behind because I still love that stuff, and I've got a couple of ideas that I still want to do, but it won't be on the same scale as before.
As a European person doing so much with China and India and those cultures, do you feel like there's a danger of you just appropriating other cultures? And how do you deal with handling them in in an aware fashion?
I think that all you have to do is, the best you can do is try and be sensitive. And the problem is, I love other cultures. I want to immerse myself in things. I love to change myself and be metamorphic and fluid. And it's hard to do because, you can't represent everything. I don't know everyone's experience. But all I can do as a person who lives in this world and reflecting the people I meet and the experiences I have is to try and be honest about that. And if I get it wrong, then all I can do is apologise. But at least I think we have to acknowledge it, because if we don't acknowledge it, we're turning our backs on everyone. And so it's a very difficult tightrope, and sometimes you fall off it, but I honestly believe it's important to immerse yourself in other people's experience as best you can to try and understand it. And as a creative person, you want to reflect that. Because I live in a world where there's all multiple. I want to talk about how I feel about that and how that seems to me and how China seems to me. I can't tell you how China feels to a kid in Shanghai, but I love Shanghai indie scene, and they're creating some great bands, and that appeals to me on a level, so I can talk about it on that level. And maybe sometimes an outsider's perspective is helpful for a culture, it's because you can see, okay, so you think we're like that? Well, no, we're not. At least gives you something to react with and to play with.
So are we ever going to get We 3 or Invisibles on TV or movies? Like, I've been dying for a We 3 movie for so long.
It's been I wrote this screenplay 10 years ago, and James Gunn, the Guardians director, is desperate to do a We 3 movie, but it's been snarled up in a bunch of different development things, typical Hollywood stuff. The Invisibles will probably never happen because that comic has been raped of its ideas by so many other things. Every time I see something, here's a bit of the Invisibles, there's a bit in True Detective, there's a bit in Kingsman, there's a bit in... So I don't think the Invisibles will ever happen, but honestly, I don't mind. That comic is just what it was, and it was there at the time, and that's what it represents.
So, do you think American superhero comics can move past the core fanboy kind of aging, kind of insular demographic, or are they just doomed to keep trying to appeal more and more kind of granularly to that smaller audience?
No, I think what you're seeing right now is an attempt to get away from that, because even on a purely business level, they realise these guys are going to die soon, and in some cases they're probably going to die tomorrow. But we're actually seeing people making an effort to move beyond that demographic. But again, I think ultimately that demographic will become a shrinking minority that we should all listen to, because maybe they'll have a weird perspective that by that time no one will have thought of for 20 years. So I think honestly, I love all people. I know there's some people that are hard to love, but I think it's better to embrace everything and to understand even those old bastards, And I'm one of them now. I'm a middle-aged white dude. What can I say?
What kind of Batcave would Tofu Batman have?
What kind of Batcave? I think he'd have a Chinese soup Batcave, so that he could just be dropped into it and float, and all his stuff would float around him, like noodles and stuff. But the noodles would be computers and screens. It'd be more like a soup bowl. It wouldn't even be a cave. He would just
be like a walk.
Yeah, he would drop into this thing, and there'd be soup stuff. That's my idea for Tofu Batman.
When can we buy Tofu Batman #1?
We'll have to ask DC about that, and maybe that's what I'm announcing tomorrow. You don't know.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Cool. Oh yeah, which is cooler, Marvel or DC?
Which is cooler, Marvel or DC? Does cool come into this? That's my answer.
Okay, thank you. Okay, cool.